Welcome back for episode 4 of the harmony module. Now that we have a fuller appreciation for thirds, what they are, and how they stack to create triads, we can talk about vertical harmony. In this video, we'll go deeper into the vertical aspect of harmony. We'll introduce and examine concepts like root position, inversions, and explore the topic of chord voicings and get to know what they all sound like. In the next video, we'll talk about the horizontal aspect of harmony. In our last video, which you probably thought was super jam-packed, just wait for this one, we learned how to construct triads from thirds, which are simply 2-note chords 3 scale degrees apart. These diatonic, as opposed to chromatic, triads all come embedded within the major scale. They're known as the major 1, the minor 2, the minor 3, the major 4, the major 5, the minor 6, and the diminished 7. This is huge! I can't overstate how great an impact knowing this will have on your approach to harmony. Much like the scale degrees act as a code breaker for melody, these chord numerals will act as a code breaker for harmony. Every song written in a major key, and that's a lot of them, uses only these 7 chords or some variation on them. And most of them never even use the diminished 7 chord. So mostly, they actually only use 6 chords. And for better or worse, many songs rarely use more than 4 of them, and in some cases, even fewer. What this means for us is when we recognize the usage of these 6 chords and see their prominence in the music we love, we will begin to develop the ability to play chord progressions by ear, understand more about our own chord choices in the songs we seek to write, and a whole lot more that adds to our confidence when we approach a number of musical situations. This is why it is massively important that we get to know these chords on a sonic as well as a theoretical level. The more we get to know these 6 diatonic chords, the more we demystify the world of harmony. Let's go through each of them now. I've created another interactive YouTube video to help you very easily trigger the triads in the key of C major. We're looking to remove all obstacles here. You can use your keyboard to trigger them to follow along as I play them on the guitar, or play along on your instrument of choice by locating the individual scale degrees that, when played together, form the triads that we're looking for. Here we go, here we go. Yeah, to change it up, you know? To change it up. Here's major 1, minor 2, minor 3, major 4, major 5, minor 6, and diminished 7 in the key of C. Now, whoa, you can probably already hear why diminished 7 might not be used as often in chord progressions. It sounds quite different from the others, and since we're theory people, we like to know why. At first glance, it doesn't seem that the diminished 7 chord seems all that strange. After all, it's constructed using 2 thirds, stacked on top of each other, one over the other, just like the others. But as I said in the last video, 1 half step makes a huge difference. 1 half step can be the difference between feeling icky or comfortable, between soul-crushing devastation and transcendent, soaring triumph. Okay? So let's look a little closer. Every chord up until 7 uses a major third and a minor third. Do you see it now? The 7 is different. It uses 2 minor thirds, and they sound like this. minor third between 7 and 9, and between 9 and 11 is another minor third. And these are the 7, 9, and 11 in the key of C, of course. In addition, if we extend the grid and the major scale up to the next octave, we will see something else as well. Do you see it? The relationship between the 7 and the 11 is different from the others as well. This is where intervals come in handy once again. Whereas 1 and 5 and 2 and 6 and 3 and 7 and 4 and 8 and 5 and 9 and lastly 6 and 10 all form relationships of 7 half steps on the outside of the respective triads. 7 and 11, however, form an outside interval of only 6 half steps. I almost don't even need to explain that 7 half step intervals sound pretty plain, very stable, as you might say. 6 half step intervals, however, sound anything but plain. Here it is again. This interval sounds very dissonant. In fact, this interval sits on the other end of the consonance dissonance spectrum. The perfect fifth, not surprisingly, is on the nicer side of the spectrum. Known as a diminished fifth or an augmented fourth, depending on the context, or more generally called the tritone for the 3 whole steps we can fit in between. This 6 half-step interval, and therefore this particular chord, sounds very dissonant overall. We call it a diminished triad. It's a sound that we'll explore in a future video at greater length, where we look at the ways the diminished triad is used precisely for its dissonant character. Again, dissonance doesn't somehow mean that some interval is wrong or bad. It simply means that the interval generates a lot of tension. Several hundred years ago, composing with this interval may have gotten you into some trouble with the people commissioning your art. But thankfully, we live in a diverse musical time where this gets used, and in some pretty awesome ways. The way music theorists characterize the tritone, and therefore the diminished triad as well, rather than calling it wrong or bad, simply they refer to it as unstable. So we'll cross this off for now. Now let's get back to the other 6 chords and focus on the ones that sound a bit more approachable and see the most use in popular music. Let's get to know them better. Much like the 1 of the scale, the 1 chord sounds like home. On top of that, it sounds stable, pleasant, and open, similar to the major third, 1 and 3, that it uses on the bottom, just like we mentioned in the last video. In fact, the 5th in this triad, there, right there, it doesn't really add anything terribly distinct or contentious on top of the impression that we already have of the major third. 2 other chords, 4 and 5, share the same quality as well. They may not sound like home in the same way that the 1 does, but they both have that stable, pleasant, and open quality to it. Like we're walking out of the house on a sunny day. This is because the notes in these chords and the ways in which they interrelate is the same. You can see this when you have a closer look, as the 4 and the 5 each have the same relationships. A major third on the bottom and a minor third on top. And if we look to the outside interval as well, like we looked at the outside interval of the diminished 7, we'll also see the perfect fifth in both. And I'll write those in now. And as I mentioned in the last video, we can also classify each note of each chord by their positions within the chord to make comparisons between different chord types easy. The 1, 4, and 5 here would each be the roots of their respective chords. The 3, the 6, and the 7 would each be the third of their respective chords, and the 5, the 8, and the 9 would each represent the 5th of each respective chord. We can already put the 1, the 4, and the 5 together and create some chord progressions. For example, if you've ever been in church, you might recognize this. Amen. 4-1 is a very popular way to wrap up a chord progression, also known as a cadence, a basic kind of chord progression. Music theory guys often call it the Amen cadence, although the official name of it is the plagal cadence. The most popular cadence in Western classical music would be the 5 to the 1, and it permeates music even today. It's called the authentic cadence. Here's an example of the authentic cadence bringing a song that we know and love to conclusion. The song sounds nice and complete with the 5, 1 there at the end. Using only the 1, the 4, and the 5, we can outline a basic 12-bar blues progression in the key of C as well. I've got the blues. Warren's making me learn music theory. Oh, I've got the blues. Warren's making me learn music theory. And I've had it up to here with tabs and tutorials only. Man, that's a terrible blues song. I'm glad I don't write blues. Using only 1, 4, and 5, in fact, we can recreate a ton of songs. Twist and Shout by the Beatles is 1-4-5 in the key of D. Wild Thing by the Trogs is 1-4-5 in the key of A. Blowin' in the Wind by Bob Dylan is 1-4-5 in the key of G. Donna or La Bamba by Ritchie Valens or Great Balls of Fire by Jerry Lee Lewis are just a few others from the early rock and folk days to make my point. But the real point here, as always, is not to learn these songs from the module. The point here is that you recognize when a song uses 1, 4, and 5 for yourself. When you do, you don't need Google to tell you the chords. You don't need to ask anyone, you just know. And that begins with understanding what these chords are and how they relate to each other in both sound and theory. Let's go through the other remaining triads. As you can imagine, when we add even just one more chord into the mix, chord progressions suddenly explode with even more beautifully diverse possibilities. The remaining triads are 2, 3, and 6. In the same way that the major triads share qualities with the major thirds that they each have on the bottom, the minor triads also share qualities with the minor thirds they have on the bottom as well. The main difference between these triads and the major ones, as you can hopefully already see, is that the thirds are switched. Whereas in the major triads, we have major thirds on the bottom and minor thirds stacked on top. With the 2, the 3, and the 6 chords, we have minor thirds on the bottom and major thirds stacked on the top. It's exactly opposite. But what about the outside interval for each of these minor triads? Let's see what we have. Now we see that whether we're dealing with major chords on the 1, the 4, and the 5, or minor chords on the 2, the 3, and the 6, the outside interval all the way up to the diminished 7 chord is a perfect fifth straight through. Again, a perfect fifth does not add anything super distinct or contentious to the initial thirds flavor. It really just completes it and complements it. Now that we've fully dissected each triad and we see that they naturally fall into 2 groups, major and minor triads, it's time to get our ear involved in the process. Can you tell whether a chord is major or minor purely by ear? If so, how long does it take you? If I give you a 1, can you tell whether I'm playing a 1, a 4, or a 5 afterwards? If I give you a 1, can you tell whether I'm playing a 2, a 3, or a 6 chord afterwards? Or if I give you the 1 and you play from the entire pool, 1 through 6, can you tell which one it is? If I give you the 1, can you sing an outline of any given triad? 5, 7, 9, for example, if this was the 1. Can you do it without humming scale degrees in between? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, oh, there's the 5, and then 5, and then 7, and then 9, and going through all those intermediate steps to get there. If I give you the root of the chord, can you sing the third or the flat third? If I give you the flat third or the third, can you sing the root? If I give you the fifth of the chord, can you sing the root? If I play a triad, can you sing the root? How about the third or the flat third or the fifth? If your answer to these questions involves any hesitation or doubt, this means that your approach to songs that use 1 through 6 in their chord progressions will also involve hesitation and doubt. That's okay at this point, especially after all, this is why you're here. But here's what we can finally do about it. Bring up the interactive triad video or bring your instrument in and play along as we go through these steps. Step 1, play the 1, and then the 4, and then the 5. Listen to the way home goes outside and enjoys the sunny day. And observe how it feels when we return home again. Now, step 2. Select any other triad and play it. Don't worry so much about the 7 chord at this stage. Now, step 3. Look up the chord that you just played. I played a 3 chord. And see if it's a major chord or a minor chord. It is, it's minor. Now, if it's a minor chord, what you want to do is listen to the root of the chord. Do you hear that note? And then listen to the flat third of the chord. Here's the flat third of the chord. Can you hear it? And then you listen to the fifth of the chord. Now, if it's major, you just use the root, the third, and the fifth, and you do the same thing. Play it as many times as necessary for your ear to grasp each distinct note. Step 4, don't be discouraged if this is tough. If the triad is being played harmonically, that means that the notes sound out simultaneously, then this makes it more difficult to sound out each note individually, despite the fact that you may grasp its position within the chord. Oh, this is a root, this is a third, or this is a fifth. Why am I still having trouble hearing this? Well, step 5, if you still have trouble, pull up the interactive C major scale again and have it in another browser tab, or use your instrument to sound out the scale degrees individually. There's the root of the 3 chord, there's the flat third of the 3 chord, and there's the fifth of the 3 chord, and you know what I'm doing right now is I'm matching each one of these notes individually with my voice. I'm matching the 3, the 5, and the 7, which are respectively the root, the flat third, and the 5th of the chord, so that I can hone my ear to the chord and the parts of it. Do this until you can hear and reproduce each respective note from within the layers of the chord. Step 6. When you can grasp each distinct root, third or flat third, and 5th of each chord, try humming along with the song in a major key. I've included a few examples for you to get started in your first harmony song puzzles. Write down the chord numerals you think correspond with the chord changes. Can you identify the chord progression by ear? Try playing it back to yourself and seeing how you did. We'll dive more into detail about this as we talk about a process for harmony in episode 6 of this module. And finally, step 7. Push yourself even further. If you were given any scale degree and a designation of either a root, a third or flat third, or a 5th, could you sing the other parts of the chord around it? For example, if I were given this note, and I was told that it was a third of the chord, would I be able to sing the root of the chord, hopefully? And would I be able to sing the 5th of the chord, hopefully? Well, I was given a 6, and what I did was I sang the 4 and the 8 of the key to fill out the entire root, third, 5th of that chord. You can do the same and push yourself if you use flashcards for this to test your ear for vertical harmony. In summary, the more you grasp each note's position in its respective triad, the more you will experience firsthand how they relate to each other. You'll know the root and how it feels like it anchors the chord. You'll know the third or the flat third and how it lends the chord its flavor. You'll know the 5th and how it adds stability and plainly ornaments and completes the triad. Or in the case of the diminished 7 chord, you'll hear how it throws off the stability of the chord entirely and creates a super dissonant sound. Now, we'll move it over to the piano to illustrate what I promised in the last video: root position, inversions, and voicings. Root position refers to triads in a state we've already been discussing, triads with their root in the bass. Classically, this also means that the root is followed directly by a third or a flat third above, and finally the 5th on top. But in modern times, this has become a bit more flexible, and generally means only that the root is in the bass. For example, if I play a C major, whenever the C is in the bass, we can say it's a C major. And when someone asks about how it's structured or whether there are any inversions, we can just say, no, this is just plain root position C major. And this is generally assumed that a C major refers to a C major chord with a C in the bass. But music always innovates, and a single chord may be presented in different ways. We can think of these as slight variations on the chord, but still think of the chord as having maintained its identity or essence. One of the most popular variations on a chord is an inversion. An inversion is when the chord is presented with either its third or flat third or its 5th in the bass, and we can expand on that definition as we go. The important thing here is that inversion has a note other than the root anchoring the chord, imparting on the chord its flavor in the bass. The root moves elsewhere, and thus the chord sounds inverted. When I play that same C chord, but instead I play the E in the bass, the E becomes the anchor of the chord, and the chord behaves a little differently. This is called C in first inversion, or in guitar or jazz speak, C over E. What I've done is I've moved the C. It's now an octave higher than where it was originally. The structure of the chord has changed. Now, the overall identity of the chord is still a C major because it still uses the notes of the C major triad, but its affect now reflects something new, something pertaining to the shift. So what has changed exactly? Sure, I've moved the C, but now different relationships appear. The bass note, instead of being a major third from C to E, is now a minor third to the next note, which is a G. This is actually really tough to visualize on the guitar because of the way the strings are tuned. But here on the piano, we see clearly the relationship of 3 half steps between the E and the G. And this is what we're hearing when we hear the shift. The quality of the chord now reflects this minor third. And if you notice its similarity to another chord from the key of C, the E minor, which is E, G, B, it's easy to see why in some cases C over E can be entirely confused for E minor. But although it behaves similarly to an E minor, it has one big difference: the outside interval. The outside interval is no longer a perfect fifth, but a minor sixth. You can look this up on the interval chart as well, but a minor sixth is 8 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it sounds more dissonant than a perfect fifth. Additionally, another new relationship between the G and the higher C has also been introduced: the perfect fourth. The G and the C together sound very consonant, almost as plain or unobtrusive as the perfect fifth. So when taken together, the minor third and the perfect fourth and the minor sixth present the same chord, but in a structure that overall gives our ears a very interesting innovation on what would otherwise be a standard root position triad. And second inversion follows similar lines of thinking. We take the same chord again, C major, but this time bring the third up an octave and still use the higher C. This again is still a C major chord in its identity, as it is still using a C, E, and a G, but its internal structure has once again changed. Now, instead of a major third or a minor third as the first relationship we hear emerging from the bass note and the middle note of the chord, we hear a perfect fourth to start things off. And here we observe the familiar major third that we have in our root position triad, but this time it's up above. And finally, the outside interval has changed once more, and it now consists of 9 half steps, or a major sixth. The other chord built on G in the key of C major is G major. And it only shares one other note, one of the notes with the C in second inversion, or also called C over G. And yet, C over G is often mistaken for G major as well. I myself have gotten the two chords confused many times, especially early on when I didn't have a theory teacher to illustrate the differences on an instrument. The major sixth on the outside, however, is a big giveaway as to which inversion it is. Now, in classical thought, first inversion refers to a chord structured with the third, followed by the fifth, followed by the root, in that specific order. And second inversion refers to a chord structured with the fifth, followed by the root, followed by the third, in that strict order. But in modern times, those definitions have relaxed and expanded to some confusion to include any configuration where the third or flat third or the fifth occupies instead of the root. But the main point of an inversion, whether it's a strict classical inversion or a guitar or jazz type inversion, is that the chord's identity remains, and yet its structure and relationships have flipped around in some way, which is evident when we hear the chord. I'll show you a basic chord progression now, first in root position, and then I'll alter it to give it a different presentation using inversions. Here is Happy Birthday in root position. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Warren Music student. Happy birthday to you. Now, here is happy birthday with some inversions. Happy birthday to you, which is a 5 chord in the key of C, G major in second inversion. Happy birthday. First inversion, G major chord, to you. A happy birthday, dear Warren Music student. Whoa, different inversions of C and F major, which are the 1 and 4 of the key. Happy birthday to you. So I'll play that one more time. Do you follow? Do you hear the difference? Now for our last subject, voicings. Root position, first inversion, and second inversion are all different voicings of the same chord. A voicing is simply a way to view a chord as if its different parts are singers or different voices. We have the voice in the bass, in the middle, and the high voice in each of these triads. And each of them sings either the root, the third, or the fifth, depending on which voicing is being played. Because the low one can sing the root in this chord, the low one can sing the third in this chord, or the low one can sing the fifth in this chord, and so on and so forth. But there is almost no limit to the number of voicings or configurations we can employ. For example, we can double the root. We can double the third. We can double the fifth. We can double the root and the fifth. We can double the root, the third, and the fifth. Or we can change the voicing entirely into what's really popular, known as also the open voicing. This is a super popular one because immediately we go here, and then we go here. And all I did here was create an open voicing, which is the same voicing that Radiohead's Reckoner uses. When I used the C major, I simply took the third, removed it from within the original root position triad, and placed it above. And then I did the same thing with an E minor. And so the third, or the flat third in this case, because it's a minor triad, I removed it from within the root position triad and placed it above. And then the same thing happened with a D major. In this case, the third of this chord, removed it from within the root position triad, and I moved it up an octave to here. And suddenly I'm filled with emotion, and I wish to cry. Basic chord shapes on the guitar are rarely ever pure root position triads. In the key of C, for example, this C major chord is actually a root, a third, a fifth, and then another root, an octave higher, and then a third above, which makes it a 10th. And the D minor, which is the 2 chord, is a root, a fifth, another root, an octave up, and then a flat third on top of that, which makes it a flat 10th in relation to the root. And I could go on and on in the key of C about how each root position chord is actually voiced differently. The structure of each one of these chord shapes that you likely already know are each worth analysis. Their internal intervals and their external outside intervals are all spaced in such a way as to give you an overall impression or affect of a chord, despite what understanding a root position chord looks like in theory. Discerning artists are especially aware of voicings when they care about texture, chord density, or the overall aesthetics of a piece or a musical segment. When fingerpicking on guitar, for example, a different voicing can make or break an entire arrangement. In conclusion, now that we know these 6 diatonic chords that show up all over the music we love, and have an appreciation for the variations and configurations that may appear, we have a much deeper hold on the world of harmony, and we are that much more ready to grasp what real-world chord progressions might throw at us. This is what it means to know vertical harmony. This is what we are looking for when we say, I want to get to know harmony. I want to get to know firsthand how harmony works. The work we're doing here makes our ears and our minds more plastic, more ready to not only passively receive what's happening in the harmony of the songs we love, but to actively take it, grasp it, and make it our own. As if 1 through 6 were our own possessions with which we use to recognize, understand, and interpret things for our own musical benefit. Stay tuned for our next video where we'll explore the horizontal aspect of harmony.